Yeah. 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 Okay.
Hello and welcome to Afrospace. My name is Natasha Grace and I'm joined by my co-host, that's Adetunji Omotola. This is the show where we come and profile to you what's happening on the continent, economically, politically, as well as culturally. On our show this afternoon, we are privileged to have the phenomenal Natasha Muhoza. Natasha, who's joining us from Nairobi this afternoon, is a poet and a storyteller. She is also a blogger, she is a writer, she is a lawyer, and she is a former columnist of the new Times Rwanda, which is the national newspaper for Rwanda. She describes herself as somebody who is a lover of word, of sound, of life, of people, and outdoors. She has performed for audiences in Rwanda, Kenya, and the USA, and her work explores her passions for African heritage. It explores her passion for the Rwanda story, and it also explores identity issues and self-discovery, women, amongst many other topics. And she describes herself as an eternal believer in the power of creative arts to enlighten human consciousness and to move the world forward. Natasha, we're so privileged to have you on Afrospace this afternoon. A very, very big welcome to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. Now, Natasha, let's first look. I mean, you're from Rwanda, right? And your country has been regarded as a very beautiful country by many. You know, beautiful scenery. In French, there's talk about le pays de mille collines, which is, you know, a land of 1,000 hills. Now, we get a sense that Rwanda is one of the best well-kept countries or land countries in Africa. But from your own lens, is this true, or is just a beautiful story about another African country like we hear about so many African countries that are very beautiful? Is all of this true?
Well, yeah, I'm quite excited to answer this question every time it comes up because I'm proud that it's not just a beautiful story, but it is really the reality on the ground. If anyone who knows their African history well enough, then they know where Rwanda was 27 years ago. It was effectively a failed state. It was nowhere to be seen in anything, you know, any world issue that mattered really. But you know, I think the tragedy that my country suffered in 1994 in many ways paved a path for new beginning, complete new beginning. And I say that in the sense of, you know, just utter transformation. So from that tragedy was born a country that is so intent on surviving the times, and not just surviving the times, but thriving. And that we owe that to such visionary and undeniably so leadership from, you know, the government that is in place today, but also the people of Rwanda who just knew what it meant to be stateless, to belong, and also to live in a home or a country which they were proud to be and to you know, to tell the world of. So that commitment, that spirit of rebirth that everybody wanted to be a part of is what is the reason this, our country, small as it is and maybe not as resource rich, has still managed to rise above so many odds in being the star country, so to speak, on the continent that it is today. You know, there's just that spirit of leading it right, of doing right by the land, by its people, and you know, just sort of to say history should remember that this country has been to the worst place and will never be there again, you know. So yeah, so much of what you hear out there about Rwanda is true, and it is just a beautiful feeling to be able to say that, a humbling one too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I mean, such a
Great
transformation story. Yeah.
Great story. It's as if I'm there. It's as if I was there from beginning to end. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yasha?
Natasha, yeah, I mean, the story of the transformation that Rwanda has gone through is really quite chilling, considering, in your own words, you know, that the country did actually go to the worst of its place that it could as a nation, and be able to turn around and become such a beacon of hope on the continent. And I mean, some have even gone as far as describing Rwanda as the Singapore of Africa. And a lot of parallels can be drawn between those two nations. And particularly one that I want to highlight is the cleanliness of Rwanda. Could you tell us for Rwanda, how they have achieved this clean reputation, this reputation rather, of being such a clean country? I know that, you know, that plastic has been disused in the country, and also there are these monthly community cleanups that are conducted. But tell us the story of the clean up of Rwanda. How has that been achieved?
Yeah, Rwanda's cleanliness, or that policy, that's it's really become, and I say that I struggle, I think, to find the right word, because it came from just being a policy to being really part of the fabric of the society across the country. Again, in reference to where we were in 94 and the years right after we came, there was so much about imposing that policy, or just setting that policy in place, that meant cleaning up from more than just a policy level, but in really environmental level, a very spiritual level in a certain sense. If you recall the nature of that war, you had a time where, you know, it was before the war, or before the genocide, and I take back the word war, because it was a genocide. Before that time, it was cleanliness was not really something that was a part and parcel of the society in Rwanda, because, you know, having garbage everywhere, and having, you know, heaps and stuff like that was something quite normal. It's something that you will also find in many states, and it reflects on, you know, a certain level of negligence when it comes to you know, environmental awareness, or whatever, for countries. But for Rwanda, what that season of genocide did was that, you know, the whole country was really full of, you know, bodies laying around, and just such tragic sights, that to clean it up and to do that work of renewing the country, kind of reshaping it in another way, almost naturally led to, I can see how it led to that, that need to clean up. But also beyond that, it is a very cultural aspect of the Rwandan people to work together, to build together. It's a very like prized idea in Rwanda's cultural history, and to come together to find solutions as a society. And so this policy for cleaning up the country is something that emerged as a way to bring communities together. If you do remember, there was a time where, you know, it was a mission of the government to make sure that the communities dealt with their justice issues coming from 94 onwards through in a communal style. And if you know, and from the justice perspective, that was the Gacaca courts, in which the community came together to adjudicate on matters about genocide and perpetrators, and trying to seek healing and etc. for all the parties involved. But in addition to that, there came this not just tackling the justice side of things, but tackling the rebuilding of the nation side of things. So cleaning became that thing, or it already was, but it became more, the society became more intent about meeting every month to clean together our immediate neighborhoods for families and people of all sorts of backgrounds, and to come together and say, without, how do we make sure that our small village or a town is kept clean, is rebuilt, is, so that meant people meet in a shamba, or which is maybe say like a garden or farms, to clean the area. But also after those meetings, after that, doing that work, people sat together, people still do, sit together and discuss community issues, what's going well, what's not going well, what needs to be done from small cells. If you know the governance organization of the country is that we're divided into really up to the very, very small neighborhood type of way, such that you have this system where neighbors need to actually work together to find solutions for their immediate neighborhood. So cleaning was really a policy that did more than just clean up to look beautiful and pretty for the rest of the world to see, although that added onto the country's environmental awareness at all levels. And young kids could grow up in a clean environment. Young kids could embody the spiritual aspects of growth and health, good health, just because of understanding the importance of cleaning the country. You had a country that became more conscious to pollution because of this very fact of a policy to clean neighborhoods and clean our environs across the country. So you will find that it is very standard, not just the city, which is probably the most photographed part of the country, but it goes into the villages, it goes into the smallest, most remote communities, because people in their very small neighborhood circles understand that to take care of this area of ours, to take care of this home of ours, that is, our roads, our streets, our gardens, is to take care of ourselves as a nation and as a community. So that really just reflects, that policy reflects and also helps the country and the government to tackle so many things below the surface, beyond just looking nice, but then also it happens to attract the rest of the world. It happens to not, and I say attract not from specifically an aesthetic point of view, but attract from the perspective of inviting fellow Africans living in African countries that have so much potential, to say that communities can work together. African communities can work together and can do so many things within their communities to really empower themselves without waiting for any outside sort of support. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Now, you were born in Uganda, right? The Pearl of Africa. And I know that Uganda, they have a lot of different languages, like Zambia, Nigeria, Ghana, and so on. Now, do you speak any Ugandan languages? And if so, which ones? I came across a few: Luganda, Lusoga, Gwere, Acholi, Amba, and so on. So which ones, obviously, being born there, I know that you can speak a few, but Which ones do you speak? And which
I
one
speak
do you think that we should learn because it's more universal in the country or around the region? The Ugandan language.
I
So,
speak
which one do
Luganda.
you speak? Sorry?
I speak Luganda. I don't think I wouldn't classify myself as the best because just when I thought I knew so much Luganda, you meet a real Muganda who understands the depth of that language, and then you realize you actually don't know that much. But I do speak Luganda, conversational. At a conversational level. I will not pronounce myself on which language in Uganda you need to learn, or I think, because really, it just happened to be a place I lived, I went to school in, and the beauty of Uganda that I find is that the diversity of language and cultures that just meet. So at any one point, I mean, my parents speak about 4 Ugandan languages because at different points in time they lived in different parts of the country, and all those languages are absolutely beautiful. All those languages, so I don't even know which one to point to as the more universal one. Although, well, it's most. I will say that Luganda does have quite some influence across the country. So it's more likely that most people across the country will speak it or understand it because of its reach. However, it's just. For me, it just happens to be the one I know, but I do understand Lunyankore as well.
All right. And so, Natasha, we know that on finishing your high school, you decided to go and study abroad, and you went and studied in the US. And we want you to talk us through a decision, I think a very important decision, an interesting decision that you made at the point of leaving the US to decide to go and study in Kenya. But before you answer that question, perhaps just walk us a little bit, if I take you back a little bit from the time you studied, I mean, you were born and raised and studying in Uganda to the time that you went and you rejoined Rwanda, your parents moved back to Rwanda. Talk us about the journey that you experienced in assimilating back into the Rwandan community, and just how you were able to embody and to possess the Rwandan identity that you have done so beautifully to a point where you become a renowned poet in Rwandan storytelling.
Well, yeah, thank you. My parents moved back just shortly after 1994. So I think my dad moved back in 95 or the end of 94. And then we followed, my mom and the rest of us followed just shortly after that. So we did come into the country as soon as the family could. But for us, we just remained, so many of our family members remained, connected to Uganda, and then some of them stayed over. But we from a personal perspective, I, continued to, Uganda was where we knew, that's where our childhood memories were formed and shaped all through my years in school until I was 14 is when I moved back to Rwanda, which really came about as because of a decision. I think that was a result of a number of things. Is that at the point my parents felt comfortable that at this point we could change, we could make that change in terms of like environment and anything from an academic point of view, because a certain level of stability is what they really wanted for us, I imagine, among many other things. But also that need to connect and that the need they saw, they wanted, I think, that fulfillment that we could connect completely and soak ourselves in our history and our language and our, because I didn't speak the language actually before that. And so that need really drove our parents to say, you know what, move. And so we did. I didn't know what to think about it in the beginning, but it was home. I was there every year. It was home.
Mm.
In many ways, Uganda was home too, but there's just that thing about home, you know. And so for the change was real. The change was really, it had to come with acceptance that, you know what, this is, we want to embrace home as much as we can. And so I remember one of the things for me was learning the language. Because I could only greet and I could just do this, the minimal, say minimal things, not really connect with the history as much beyond stories that we'd been told growing up about our home. But I think the move from an academic point of view and or from an academic environment was to go and connect with other young people growing up and trying to figure out the world in school. For me, I think that was the best way to make the move from countries. So when that happened, for me, that was a turning point in many ways, because then I got to see my country 100% face to face. I got to see it, to engage with it. I got to speak the language very substandardly, but still feel that, you know what, I'm learning and I'm going to speak it until I know. I'm going to try and speak whatever I know until I get the language. Mm. And that happened in about a year or a year and a half. Wow. Just because we practiced it in school. And of course, you know, I've always had a little rebel in me and just saying, okay, I know all this English and I love poetry and writing because I always have. And I just know this English language so well, but it's the white man's language. I want to know my language. And I want to, you know, so for me, those things really like, and if anyone engages with language, with African languages at a deeper level, they know the richness and the wealth of it, and like the power of the poetic power that I see, but also just the general power of our languages. So for me, that was a change. And I don't know if maybe that means the same for everybody. But for me, the changing and the learning of my language was, in a certain sense, claiming my place, my home, in like within myself, just feeling that I had really acclimated. And then the transition really just kind of went from there, just understanding the society, how it works, our stories, engaging with a community where, you know, people who are directly affected by the genocide, and just understanding the complexities and the beauties of my home. So for me, that really became almost a life mission of mine through my art. My avenue is my art, but it really, my art is informed by this undying thirst to understand my home, my history, the complexities of it all, and try to explore that, to ask the questions that I still have sometimes, but some of them have been answered along the way, and to accept that some things I may never maybe fully understand because I don't have that historical grounding, but also just knowing that, you know, embracing my home in all its ways, with all its flaws and all its beauty, is just, for me, a thing that I want to do for the rest of my life. And so maybe that is why it reflects as me being very, you know, maybe my art being, you know, predominantly about my home, my country, but it's just really because that's the fire that burns in me, that continues to, you know, to inspire me to write and to create around issues in my country. Yeah.
Okay. So, Natasha, that's a very powerful story you just shared with our viewers on your love for your country and the community, learning the language, and what you have to do to learn your own home language, because obviously you were born somewhere else. Now, tell us about Jamhuri ya Kenya. You are in Kenya, the country that has produced. There are very few. There's a small side to this. There are very few African countries that have produced father and son presidents. the country you live in has produced
Mhm.
father and son in Mzee Jomo Kenyatta and Uhuru Kenyatta, right? And I believe Gabon has also done the same, and Togo has also done the same. So there's quite a few in Africa. But tell us, why Kenya? Why did you choose to move to Kenya? Because obviously Kenya is also another country. I mean, you were not born there, you're not from Kenya. Why Kenya?
If I could sum it up in one word, I would say adventure.
Mm.
But it really came because of school. It was an option I had on the table when I was, thinking of where to go to law school on the continent. The school that I found and that I ended up, graduating from, is a very good institution where I thought, you know what, I can get a world-class legal education from there, therefore we're going to do it. And so I just put the option there for my family, and luckily, I think very luckily, I got that acceptance and that support and was able to come to Kenya for school, because I moved from the United States. A part of me really was just in this mode of really telling myself that, a world-class education can be gotten from Africa. And so for me, I was kind of proud to be that story, one of those who, moves home instead of the other way around for a good education. I'm proud I made that decision. And I chose to stay because I fell in love with this country. I fell in love with Kenya in a way I cannot explain, because Kenya has its own chaos and its own issues as any other place in the world. But there's just something about Nairobi, about Kenya, that for me resonated so well. I'm able to do both my professional or legal side of work and still explore the creative side of me. And Nairobi is such a good place to do that, because it kind of embodies both spirits. I say that it's like a minute type of city that like any other metropolitan city like New York or any other of those, because you kind of you're able to do so much. It's buzzing with creativity and beauty and color and stories. At the same time, there's such in the more traditional professions, it's also still, it stands out quite, and I think I found such brilliant minds in this country. I found such ability for me to connect with people from all over the continent and who have a good understanding of our continent's history. And because, again, that is something that I happen to be really passionate about, understanding my continent on a wider scale, I think this place has allowed me to explore the questions, but also to have the kind of conversations and to work in an environment where those conversations are so accessible to me. And so, yeah, Kenya just grew on me. In a certain sense, it just for me, it worked, and it doesn't for everybody, but at the same time, for me, it does. Also because it's complex in ways that are very thought-provoking, get you to really think about the continent and its history, especially from the colonial history. And if you know this, Kenya, it's just really, the colonial history is still a big question. It's still tied, and it still holds the country in certain ways as well that are very, very evident. And so for me, that curiosity that sparked for me has just been, it's almost like I'm living in something I'm studying, almost in real time. And there will be a place and a time where I will tell that story or write that, I don't know, that analysis of what I think my stay in this country has been. So yeah, that's how I would describe it.
You just got yourself a job in the Ministry of Tourism of Kenya. So, Natasha?
All right.
Yeah.
So Natasha, you've already kind of talked to us about your professional life. I mean, well, at least alluded to the fact that Kenya and Nairobi has really accommodated you professionally. Could you talk to us a little bit about the balance that you're having to strike between your professional life and your creative arts? Because you are a lawyer, and we're aware that you're actually working for a reinsurance company. Is it a typical story of the creative arts who need to maintain a job, but really their hearts is that they wish they could wake up and do poetry every day? Is that your story?
Well, yeah, in some ways, yes. But also, I'm not so hard. I don't happen to have such a hard position on that aspect of that. If I had if I could, I would just jump completely into poetry every day. I like, in a certain sense, the balance that I have to strike or within myself, or have to kind of struggle for, because it just allows me to, that it teaches me internal flexibility, I guess intellectual flexibility as well. I find it like learning two sports. Actually, that's an analogy I get from the first time I accepted that the two worlds can coexist in my mind and my life. I was watching a library talk by the son of one of Kenya's biggest literary giants, who is also a professor, or was a professor at Yale, or was a visiting, I'm not quite sure, but yes, the son of Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I listened to that in my first year of law school, actually, when I was really trying to figure out how my legal education and the profession or pursuing that side of things vis-a-vis my creative side was going to work together. And he describes it as learning two sports, because he's both an academic writer and a creative writer, and he's big in both in the continent, and he still exports his work in both fields. So I mean, it's for me, it changed my perspective on how the two worlds can work. Although definitely, you know, the things that make me come alive and the things that make me my brightest self, so to speak, is any space in which I'm telling stories or listening to stories being told about this continent, about human beings, about society, about, you know, just storytelling. Because for me, I think the beauty of storytelling, the power of storytelling is I think the power upon which the world moves and the world rotates. And that is still what breathes life into society. I think that's what challenges society to rise to the occasion. So for me, that is where I think, if I had a dying wish, if I was to say which specific maybe area or space that I would want to give a lot of my contribution, I actually look at it as my contribution to humanity while I'm on this earth. While I have life, I think it's in my storytelling, it's in my giftings that comes quite naturally. So yeah, for me, those and having the peace that is my gift, and those are the things I really will do regardless, allows me to, you know, pursue my legal, my professional side of life quite comfortably, and really just learning my way through it. I'm young in the legal profession, and reinsurance was not something I planned or expected. At least I knew that even if I was going to do to practice law, it would probably be like, you know, in something like human rights or something, maybe commercial law, and those that, you know, other aspects of law that I maybe would have, you know, I felt like I would have gravitated towards. But, you know, life kind of has a way of doing things, and you just end up in spaces. And I realized that even being in a place where I have to practice finance law and insurance law and the corporate side of law is really where I need to be to learn what I am learning. So I find myself in a place of so much ease when it comes to accepting that, you know, these two worlds of mine can you know, have to live side by side, because I'm learning what I need to be learning in my legal profession as I go up that ladder, but I'm also in a place where I can still do my creative work. I still can contribute to some really humbling audiences and share my work, and really continue to contribute to society, you know. So I feel like it's just a very good place, and And the balance, though, the struggle to find that balance continues, but it's one that stretches me. And I almost like that struggle in a certain way. I'm almost really like that pull and push and that thing that I have to do. If I really want to do my creative work, I have to put in extra hours, and legal work is already mad. So it's just that thing that I think is a process that is growing me, and I kind of want to continue to go through for as long as I need to. Yeah.
Okay. So Natasha, I was just listening to you in one of your videos. I think you were reciting a poem somewhere. Gary, I recognize that building. It's got shops behind. You were talking. There was this young lady who was interviewing about your poetry, and I know that you were into debating when you were in school. You were also into basketball, but this poetry seems to be the one that is pushing you into great areas. I think you said there that somewhere that, you know, this poetry has made you connect with Africans, you know, from all over, in countries that you never imagined that there were Africans in. Now, for our viewers, can you tell us, you're a poet and you're a famous poet, and just give us a sense of how you discovered this gift of the spoken word or the written word, because I saw somewhere that you talked about putting an anthology of your poems together, and that you're also on WordPress, and you're quite versatile, you're on YouTube and so on. So tell us, how did you get this special gift, and what is your poetry most about? Is it about, you know, business or economy or culture? So give us a sense, how did it start and what is it about?
Yeah, well, how it started, I guess, is gifting, divine gifting. So I call it that because really I'm a child of the arts. I have grown. I mean, people say that, you know, it's in the family. I think I know that when my father was a young man, he was so active in drama and singing and in choirs and things like that. And we've really been we are a family of storytellers in many ways, although not everyone has really pursued that, you know, that side of things. But I have had the honor and the pleasure of doing that. I just know that, you know, growing up, since I was really little, I gravitated towards writing stories well and making sure people heard and could, you know, paid attention to the stories I was telling. So naturally, I gravitated towards anywhere there was storytelling, anywhere there was dancing, I love to dance, anywhere there was singing, because I love to sing too. I have always been in all things creative arts, because I just always gravitated towards that world, and that really shapes how I think. That really shapes why I'm curious about life and people and cultures and diversity, and that really informs. And of course, coupled with the fact that I have had the pleasure of moving around quite a bit because of school, but also experiencing different people, different places, and so that has really informed my art. Or my gravitation towards the arts. So I've been writing for a while, but I began to share it in high school, where I started, you know, really like feeling my growth and questioning life quite a bit deeper and philosophizing. In some ways, again, I am a philosopher. I think for like, even in my sleep, about, you know, questions that I have about things I want, because that is constantly going on in my head, I have to find a way of bringing it out, because that's how I make sense of the world. So my writing became that place where I go to ask myself things, to ask people things hypothetically, and to ask things about things, to imagine a world where, you know, so much stuff is possible. So I really live and really operate from that place of keeping my imagination alive and well. So I began to really perform in 2013 when I was in the US. I was really, you know, a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, just used to see what I would write in terms of like small captions of stuff. Every time I wrote something, she was like, you have a gift. And I knew of that gift. I felt the gift, but I never thought of it as something to do with performance. In fact, in many ways, I used to be there's a really timid side of me. It's grown and transformed into confidence over the years. So I'm grateful for that. But I really did not know how to take my stories out as well. And even though I grew up on stages, I loved being on stage to express art and to have people engage with whatever art I was part of, because I think ever since I was 5, I was in some form of art performance group, or so I was always there for some reason. So my performance in spoken word poetry specifically, because it's a territory of writing, specifically if you to write for spoken word form of poetry is different. And so that scared me a great deal, but also to get in front of crowds and speak my poetry just was a different experience than writing it and sharing it and having people sit with themselves and analyze it the way they felt like. Because for me, I think art is so personal. It comes from a very lone place, but also once that's out to the world, it becomes the world's, and it becomes for the audience, and really it takes on the meaning that whoever is listening or reading would decides that it will take. And so for me, there's such a humbling but very scary experience in kind of embracing spoken word poetry performance. But I really did it as I remember my first performance was for a very small gathering of international students. I was shaking, I was sweating, and I was scared. But I wrote that poem in probably 10 minutes. And after I read it, everybody wondered whether I was doing some professional poetry work somewhere, or like I got invited to share with a poetry group. And I was like, so there is something here for me to pursue. And that's why, so that just became the more dominant, or the side of my writing or my creative art life that really became pushed to the forefront and to the limelight. But in general, I remain an artist all round. I remain a storyteller, but spoken word poetry has become what my audiences have received. It's what has connected me, as you mentioned, to Africans across. And I think that's the most exciting achievement in my creative life, is just how much my work has been able to connect me with some beautiful, beautiful people, but also beautiful stories and beautiful, it's brought me to realizations about myself, about my history, about the African, just understanding Africa in general in a very powerful way. So
yeah, and I was gonna say, because from just what you've explained so far, it's very clear that you you've excelled in your spoken word and your poetry, and I was going to ask, how that has happened for you. I mean, you explain how the very first time you performed, your audience really resonated with your performance. And over the years, you have been performing for the Kwibuka, which is the annual commemoration of genocide in Rwanda. And I think last year, which was quite a watershed moment of 25 years since the genocide, Kwibuka 25, you performed there. Again, I'm sure there are many poets in Rwanda, but yet, your light is there, shining really bright. How has that happened for you? And what does it mean for you to be chosen to perform at such an important event as Kwibuka? And perhaps you can share a little bit for us from what you performed last year.
Okay, sure. Yes, I told you about a friend of mine who encouraged me to perform. It so happened that because she really knew and just knew what my capabilities were, and by the way, we weren't even that close and hadn't had such a long history of friendship, but she is the reason I started performing at Kwibuka specifically. And Kwibuka means it's just a Kinyarwanda word for the commemoration of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis. She said, you know what, I think you would do so well writing about, because you're passionate about our country and you have these things you have to say and you think about it, why don't you write about it from a creative place? And so that's how I remember I lived in Philadelphia at the time, Philadelphia in the US. And she said, you know what, why, if you can speak to somebody I know at the Rwandan embassy in DC, then perhaps they could allow you or give you space to share some work around commemoration. And so that is how I took my leap. And I remember writing the first poem I wrote about Kwibuka, which was called Tribute to My Beloved, which is, I think, is such a fitting title. But the way it came up was from such a deep place of contemplation of my country and our history. I really wanted it to be a stunning way to kind of give, but I never thought of it as going beyond that. So when I wrote that poem, I wrote it actually in a time when even I was struggling within myself emotionally. And it was just from the deepest part of my heart. And so I sent it over, and you know, the embassy loved it. And they had a lady perform it at the commemoration was coming up. And so they performed it as a Kwibuka event. And that was the genesis. And ever since that year, I have performed or shared poetry around Kwibuka, around commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsis. And so for me, that became a mark, and it became that thing that I will do for a long while to come, or maybe for the rest of my time, that I will always reflect on my country every year and write poetry around it. And so I was able to, once they read that poem and performed it, I loved how it was done. They asked me to come the next time, and when the official event was happening, they asked me to perform in person, and I haven't stopped since. And so that just became a thing that has really, and I really am grateful for that, because it has allowed audiences in Rwanda to connect with my work in a very powerful way. It has really connected me with and allowed people to really see my passion for my country. And so the last year marked 25 years. It was special because it's 25 years after a tragic genocide, but also 25 years where, if you think about it, almost a new generation is sprouting. From Rwanda, a generation that is born and that is rising almost from the ashes that Rwanda was. And so the celebration of 25 years post the genocide was special for everybody who understands how where Rwanda is compared to where it used to be. And writing poetry was special specifically on that day. I wrote a very small piece. At least it's one of the two I wrote last year, and I will read it for you and then explain it. It's titled, "We Hold Our Gaze." We hold our gaze in place. We behold your faces in every rising sun. Your cries are engraved in lasting memory. You paid the undeniable, untimely price. Your screams, our scars, your dreams turned to dust. This flame burns to honor you. Your names could never be forgotten. We hold our gaze in place for you, Bana b'u Rwanda, tuzabahoza ku mutima. And that poem, We Hold Our Gaze, is special to me because it just, while I was writing it, I was speaking to the victims of the genocide who lost their lives, but because of whom we have been able to reflect and to really move our country forward and to value human life in a very, very, very special, surreal way. So yeah, this speaking, and it was a very, very deep and very just emotional place to go to as I was writing, where I just, in my mind, sit with the the victims who lost their lives of different ages, and I speak to them as though they were alive, to honor their memory, because in our minds and the hearts of Rwandans, they did not die. They kind of just went to, you know, to another place beyond the physical realm. And they did, and that happened. They lost their lives at the not in vain, not in vain. And so just to reflect and to say that, listen, for this tragedy to happen, and we lift your names up, we will not forget you, because you are the reason we can speak with pride about our home. You know, so for me, that was just really special. And then I followed that poem with a poem that's on YouTube called Only the Beginning. Also just saying 25 years ago, 25 years on, we are still here, we're still thriving, we're still growing as a nation, we're still persisting in this story of resilience. And so that was to say that this is only the beginning. As this generation rises into adulthood, many of them, people who were born in that year and beyond that, are, you know, growing into responsible citizens, loving and human conscious people, not just for Rwanda, but for the rest of the world. For me, that's special, and I would like for the rest of the world to know that. And not just the rest of the world, but for Africans really to embody that spirit as well. Yes.
Wow, thank you, Natasha, for sharing that. That's really special.
Absolutely. Now, Natasha, the final question from us, right? I'm looking at it's quite fortuitous that we are interviewing you at Afrospace in the same month that the genocide is commemorated, which is July. Well, I think you can take comfort from the fact that it is also in July that we commemorate the birthday of Nelson Mandela, because if you remember that in 1994, a few months or a few days after Mandela was being inaugurated, that's when the Rwandan genocide happened. So 94, you know, means two things for us in Africa: genocide and also the fall of apartheid. One man, one vote. But one of the things that I also wanted to share with you before I ask you this question, I'm quite lucky that I had a friend in the former Rwandan ambassador to South Africa, and I know that there's a special place where the Rwandan genocide is exhibited. Is actually a special section at the Holocaust, Johannesburg Holocaust Center in South Africa here. And I remember one of those commemorations they talk about to remember, to restore, to renew, you know, the country, to never forget what happened, but to then renew and to restore. Well, given that you are a poet and you are part of this Kibuka commemoration of the genocide, which is taken very seriously in Rwanda, I must add. How do you think that poetry, because as we speak now, we still see that there's a lot of conflict and deaths of many Africans. It may not be on the scale of, surely not on the scale of Rwanda 25 years ago, 26 years ago, but people are still being killed every single day for all sorts of silly reasons in Africa. So given that background, what role do you think that poetry can play in Africa, and how do you think this can be achieved?
I think poetry, and as does all other forms of art, exists to as the conscience of human society, as to elevate minds towards issues, real issues of society. So I think that poetry specifically, you know, calls human beings and calls societies to really look at themselves in a mirror, through the mirror, and to see who they are, what they need, and speaks on things they don't necessarily know how to articulate. But poets, I think, are called in a very high from a very place of such, I think it's a high calling to be able to speak to the times, to be able to, and I say that because it's a line inspired by Nina Simone. It's an American musical prodigy who spoke, and I point her out because she was a poet too, musician and musical, but she was a poet. I think across history, there have been moments where human beings have to look at themselves and have to question and have to confront their issues. And poets have this very, very high calling to be able to articulate those things, those frustrations, but also the beauty of those things and the complexity. And so poetry plays such a powerful part in shaping the minds, in challenging the spirit, the human spirit in general. So in the context of Africa, I think, in fact, in these times where we continue to battle those issues of continued, I guess, war and unrest and death and poverty and all those other things that, you know, that are real in Africa, poets continue to be very, very key in articulating these things, in using them for activism, in using them to bring to light stories that need to be told, and getting human beings and their societies and communities to think, to speak, to express, to let it off their chest. But at the same time, poets exist to reveal the beauty of communities, to reveal the beauty of the times as well. So we are also, I think, again, have that very high calling of seeing the beauty amidst the turmoil, and to tell and to show that beauty by way of word, by way of, description, and, whatever way, whatever style of writing or poetry or other form of art that it is, through dance, there's so much there. So I think poetry plays a very key role in challenging, in raising ideas and issues to the forefront for the purpose of conversation that is so necessary for any human being, community of human beings to progress and to become their better selves. Because if you don't have thinkers and writers and artists doing that work, abiding by that calling, then you don't have a society that's moving, that's thinking, that's feeling, and that's laughing, but that's also crying. That's mourning, but that's also celebrating. That is where the artists, and specifically the poets and the writers, come. And I think that is a very, very high honor to even say that is what I see that as one of my biggest responsibilities as an artist on this earth, because there is a real impact that you have in the lives and the minds of people and in how they think. And I see it every day in the work I do. I see these testimonies. I see how my work has very direct impact on, for example, the confidence and thinking of young women in Rwanda, for example. And that's just one out of many, so yeah.
You go. So another job, that's amazing. So another job you got already that I'm going to nominate you for, AU Ambassador for Poetry.
Hey.
The African Union Ambassador for Poetry. You've done a marvelous job in promoting poetry. I'm very proud of your work. I must say, at Afrospace, on even behalf of Biansha, I must say that proud of the way you're showcasing your work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it so much.
It's very important for us to have these conversations because you've been in East Africa, we're in Southern Africa, I come from West Africa, I've lived in Europe, you've been to America, and Yasha's traveled the world. It is very important for us as Afrospace that you're talking to our viewers to celebrate your country, to be proudly African, and to showcase your natural talent. We thank you for coming to Afrospace. And
you.
from me, as we normally say, on my side is Udabo, Kachifo, Segobe. And Nyasha?
All right, from me, Nyasha Grace, it's Sarai Jaganaka, Kwaheri, and Salakashle.
Well, you said the Swahili, but from Rwanda, we say Uraveho or Turikumye or Nahubutaha.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Natasha. That was beautiful.
Thank you, and all the best. Thank you so much.
Siyabonga.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.